Aloha, everyone. Thank you for being here this morning. And today I have three great panelists, and we're going to be discussing resilient energy and housing. And rather than me reading their full bios, I've asked them to each introduce themselves and give a concise bio for you. So we'll start with Race.
Thank you, Jacqui. So my name is Randle. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Maui Land and Pineapple Company. Born and raised in Hawaii, and I've had the pleasure of working with some amazing other real estate companies, a lot of them home builders that have been in Hawaii for many years. I had the pleasure of developing thousands of homes in Hawaii, primarily on Oahu and on the Big Island. Also renewable energy projects, which glad to see those still in good operation. I'm here today in overseeing a portfolio of about 22,000 acres of land on the island of Maui as a publicly traded company on Maui. So I'm excited to be part of this, to hear what the other presenters are working on, and passionately focused on how we can stabilize and add more resiliency to the Maui community.
Mahalo, Race. David?
Aloha. My name is David Sellers, and I am the principal architect of Hawaii Off-Grid Architecture and Engineering. I'm also the president of our local American Institute of Architects chapter, and I'm on the board of our local Habitat for Humanity Maui chapter. So obviously Hawaii Off-Grid kind of tells you a little bit about what I do, but we are the first architecture and engineering firm in the world to commit to only building new buildings that are net zero at a minimum. So that's kind of in a nutshell. Yeah.
Great, and certainly not least but last, Ben Sullivan.
Thank you, Jacqui. Ben Sullivan, happy to be back. As somebody who sat through kind of a double session yesterday, I want to invite you all to stand up and stretch while I give my introduction, because I know how it is. So go ahead and stand up. Get yourself a little flexibility in the back. Okay. My name is Ben Sullivan. I'm the Deputy Director for the City and County of Honolulu's Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, Resiliency. We work across the city and across Oahu more broadly to move towards climate mitigation in terms of carbon pollution reduction, and also to adapt to the inevitable impacts of climate change. And so excited to be in that role. Prior to that, used to work for Kauai County, actually. And then a long time ago before that, did some residential design work. So a little bit of what David does, I'm sure not to the degree, but I'm really happy to be here and part of the conversation. Thanks, Jacqui.
Mahalo, gentlemen. So as you've heard, we've got three individuals here who are well-versed to help us discuss the topic we're discussing today, and that is resilience in energy and housing. We've been talking about affordability, including yesterday when Governor Green was here, about the importance of affordability of housing. And so often when we think about affordability and housing, we forget to integrate the other things, such as energy costs and so forth. So today's panel, because we're at the Hawaii Energy Conference, we thought we'd have a more comprehensive discussion and bring in three panelists who can share their experiences, their mana'o, and more importantly, their vision as we move forward. We kind of subtitled this panel, "What Lessons Have We Learned from Lahaina?" And I'd like to remind everybody that it was not just Lahaina burning. Certainly it was the most tragic burning that was happening on August 8 in 2023. However, at the same time, those of you on Maui remember that we had fire in Kula where we lost homes. We also had multiple fires burning on Hawaii Island. And in fact, almost the exact same date, 2 years prior, in 2021, we had the largest fire on Hawaii Island, wildfire, and we came very close to losing all of Waikoloa Village. So the combination of discussing disaster, wildfire mitigation, and resilience is very important. And of course, energy plays into all of those things. So I just would like to remind everyone that this is something that has impact on all of us. And I'm very grateful and appreciative that we have this stellar panel with us. So before we continue with open questions and so forth, David, I know you're offering our group an opportunity tomorrow, and you have a few slides you can share with us, and if you'd like to talk about that, since I just brought up Lahaina and so forth.
Sure. No, thank you very much. So yes, our office has been involved with one of the temporary housing projects. So in my capacity with the AIA, the day after the fire, our national disaster recovery team contacted us and started explaining what the heck was going on, because as an architect, I didn't have any idea, never experienced it. So 3 days after the fire, we had an existing relationship with the Family Life Center. It's a local nonprofit that works with our homeless population, and so we've been working with them on their homeless shelter for a number of years as a pro bono client, as well as transitional apartments over the years. So quickly we went into action, and 11 days after the fire, we broke ground. The slide you see is the master plan. Right now, we're all poured out as far as all of our footings for foundations. We have 16 units that are completed. We have to finish up some of the energy work on 6 of them, but we have our first 10 residents moving in on Saturday. Everything is off-grid. As I mentioned, I won't build a building that is not off-grid or net zero at a minimum. I'd rather go be an electrician and make more money. So what you're going to see if you come out, this is one of our early conceptual renderings. So this is a double unit. So this is for a family of, say, 5. And you can see the roof there. That's actually solar panels that are making the overhangs that help passive solar, but also active solar. This is kind of a view of the community center. So the idea of the design was that it is it's a community, a village, and it's for multi-generational families. That's the focus. So we have a community center consisting of basically 2 20-foot shipping containers with a laundry facility, a district hot water, and then a community kitchen and a flex space for sort of wraparound services, as well as just a gathering space, a big covered lanai with solar panels on the roof and solar hot water panels as well. So every 6 dwellings or 4 dwellings are clustered around one community center. So there's 16 community centers. This is one of the community centers that is the first one that was finished, 17 kW array. And this is backing up each of the 6 dwellings that are part of that pod. Each of the 6 dwellings has between 7 and 11 kW of PV that make up the roof, but also make up the shade. And they each have a Tesla Powerwall 2 as their primary source of power and backup. So here's one of the actual units. The first pod, every pod has a different color. The first pod that was finished is Lahaina Lunar Red. And you can see there, this is designed to match our local culture. So we have a closed-in lanai to give people a sense of security, someplace to hang out outside where they're not in the public. And then the red thing on the side there, that is our bathroom kitchen pod. And it's plugged into and connected to a sort of a disaster housing module. So it's a collapsible 20-foot pre-insulated, pre-wired container that we can stack 5 of them in the place of one 20-foot shipping container. Here it is again. So you can see how important solar is to us in our designs. We don't treat solar panels as something that you put on a roof. That's a big rule in our office. We don't paste them. This is a impervious material. It lasts a long time. It creates shade. It helps protect other materials. So we try to utilize them for everything that they are. And we want people to learn how to live off-grid, or at least with batteries and solar, kind of monitor their consumption and the production, so that when they move back, they're going to take that knowledge with them. When they think about their next house, they're going to take that knowledge with them. So off-grid system for the community center that backs up all the individual units. Even our picnic tables are off-grid, so we're super proud of that. Lumos Solar, who we work with a lot, they donated several picnic tables that have chargers in them and lights. So this is going to be in our playground area at some of our team there. And then here, it's just solar panels everywhere. It's going to be about a megawatt of solar panels when we're all built out. So we hope that if anyone has time tomorrow, you can come out and take a look. We'd love to show you around.
Thank you very much, David. So I'm going to toss this question to Ben because of your role with City and County of Honolulu. How important is it, and what would you add to the effort that David is making regarding normalizing renewable energy for vulnerable population that may not have been exposed to having renewable energy integrated into their homes because of whether it's affordability or, the cost and so forth? What are your thoughts on that?
So that's a great question, and there's a lot to take in there, but absolutely critical. I will add that the city and county, in passing the 2018 International Energy Conservation Code, did put in provisions or carried forward provisions for what we call PV ready. So when builders do build buildings, trying to make the smart measures that make it easier for someone to come in later and just simply add the photovoltaic system without a lot of hemming and hawing about where to make connections and whether there's panel capacity and things like that, which is a simple thing to do, but really important to open that future opportunity. But really more than that, I think your question really brings up the bigger question of affordability, and affordability being really a sister to resilience, if you will, in that if you can't afford it, it doesn't matter how resilient it is, you're not in it. And so affordability of energy through these things that we're seeing, it is clear that the federal government has made a tremendous pivot in the Inflation Reduction Act and has put real resources for perhaps, I don't want to say the first time, but in a very meaningful way, more than I've ever seen in government, to do these things, to do what David is doing, but also to do it in existing buildings. And so one of the things that our office is very, very excited about, working with PUC and Hawaii Energy and others, and actually VEIC, who's in the room today helping us with the design, is creating a program that brings all these incentives to building owners, to multifamily building owners, whether it's an HOA or if it's a family owner, of a building that maybe hasn't been retrofit since it was built, and really looking and saying, hey, can we afford PV? Can we afford new appliances? Can we afford to make this building, keep the sun out better so that people don't have large heating loads? And all those things are tremendous opportunities. And I think the last thing I'm going to say to your question is this, and I apologize for going on, but we have limited resources as government always, even in the in the context of $369 billion coming from the Inflation Reduction Act, and where we decide to use those resources is so critical. And historically, we've used them in this kind of universal way, where we just say everybody can get this thing and it's out there. It's often a tax credit or something like that. But the outcome of that, as we all know, is that people with means get more. And so really pivoting and saying, let's bring the resources first to the place where there's the greatest need. And then if we can, maybe later we'll catch up on the others. But I don't know about you, I don't need help with energy, and it's affordable to me, and I want to recognize that it's not affordable to everybody. So if we're talking about affordability, it's a relative conversation. Let's make sure we target those resources. So back to you.
Thank you. So Race, as a developer who has experience in also working on renewable energy projects and so forth, how important is integration of renewable energy to make it affordable into the developments that you're working on?
Great developments think not just about the upfront cost, but the ongoing cost, right, for the users. I'll give you a couple stories to kind of talk about that. I moved back to Maui about a year ago, and one of the first people I reached out to, may even be in the room, a friend of mine was building a home in Haiku. And she was encountering a pretty interesting situation whereby, the cost for her home, to build her own home, to bring electricity to her home from the utility grid was comparable, if not more, than the cost to go off-grid in that same location. And it's a predicament. You hear about that one-off, but to actually have someone who's encountering that and having to make that decision was profound, right? And I won't share her decision, but she made her decision and did that. Fast forward just a few months, my family and I are in Lahaina. We're north of where the fires were located. The day before the fires were impacted. Obviously, the wind had picked up. We lost power. We then lost communications. Most people north of Lahaina weren't completely aware of the impacts of the fire until people fleeing the fire, were showing up, because we had no way to, access any information at that time. But in my neighborhood, there was one home that was resilient. It had solar panels, it had battery system, and next to that home was another home where someone had a Starlink. And it was the combination of those two things that brought together, out of hundreds and hundreds of homes, one person was prepared. And that home became the hub for 2 weeks. And so when I think of energy and its relation to just housing generally, I think we're at a very interesting point in time whereby from a cost perspective, there's a level of parity that's occurring of choosing to be connected or not connected and whatnot. And there's also this, I would say preference that we're seeing, or this desire from people that are thinking about resiliency of their own, perhaps preferring to have the comfort that may come from knowing that they are not as reliant on a system or they have options. And so it doesn't completely answer your question on affordability, but again, thinking about upfront and long-term costs, but also what is going to happen when things happen and your ability to ride through those situations. My preference would be to see a lot more than just one house in a neighborhood that's able to weather the storm.
Thank you. And I know that you have a few slides too, but before we move to that, yesterday we had a speaker who spoke about what happened in Puerto Rico, for example, and that they're still trying to recover from what happened there. And we know that, Haiti had its earthquake, and they're still trying to recover almost a decade later from all of this. So resilience is very important as we move forward. And I'd asked David the question about normalizing renewable energy. How difficult is it, do you think, for us to do more, or should we be doing more outreach into our community, especially our vulnerable communities where the Alice families, for example, their assets limited and so forth? Should we be doing more outreach and giving them the opportunity to learn and normalize renewable energy in their lives, or is that a non-issue?
Well, so, affordability is an interesting concept because we have the highest energy rates anywhere, right? So as an architect, in the same sentence, I can tell a client, we're not going to build your house or your building unless it's net zero. You look at the reaction, see what happens. But at the same time, I can say, this is the only time I'm going to tell you something that's going to make you money. So when we're talking about new buildings, if we can amortize the cost of a renewable energy system and we have a 3 to 5 year payback, we know that system is going to work really well for 20 years. We're going to make you money. So it's a really easy sell. I always say that being green is about money. Money is green. Like, how can we save you money? How can we make you money? It's just so easy now. I've lived off grid for so long, I don't even remember really not. And now with the advent of electric vehicles, the cost of, just operating my house, like I don't have an energy bill, I don't have a fuel bill, like that's huge. That's a vacation a year for my family, easy. So I think it's getting easier and easier, and I think it's really important. To speak to Ben's point on the energy code, I'm really proud of our energy code in Maui. I helped develop it. There was a real push to say that we needed to have solar panels on all homes, and so people were really pushing me, hey, write that in there. And it's like, I don't want to do anything that's going to increase the cost up front, so we did the solar ready as well. So all houses have to be solar ready unless you're 5,000 square feet or larger. If you're 5,000 square feet or larger in Maui County, you have to be net zero. Right, so I'm super proud of that. And I did get the question, well, what about multi-generational families that have a big house and it's going to be 5,000 square feet, you're going to be increasing the cost. That's true, but if it's a new home, you can amortize it, and then we're going to be lowering your monthly cost to operate the home, and that is resilient, and that is economical.
Thank you, Jacqui. I appreciate that, and certainly code is a part of this. I guess I want to remind myself in this conversation that the vast majority of the homes we live in are not new homes; they're existing homes, and we have a lot of work to do there. And it's perhaps not so much about the outreach as it is about the engagement and about the learning back, like we heard this morning about what is needed. And that's a challenging conversation in itself, because right now we have this massive federal funding opportunity and we really don't have the time due to the processes required to do as robust engagement as we want. But we've got to find out how to help people who want to help themselves and be part of this. And that needs to be where we spend our resources. Like if we're going to spend resources on engagement, on things like giving people incentives to put in PV, we know it's in the money already. So let's make sure those incentives are going where they should, where people are struggling to pay, right? As opposed to for people that make $200,000 a year more, and it's just another way for them to make money. And I think historically we have not done that. We have, for very purposefully, we moved the market, which was great. We developed a market, and that was really, really critical. And I think HSEA and others really know how important it was in the early days to have things like net metering. But as we have now a mature market, what is the appropriate policy response that we should make in terms of government resources? And then how do we actually make sure that everybody gets to participate?
So for those of you who were here last year, we did have a session on permitting related to renewable energy. And I just wanted to ask our three panelists, has there been improvement in getting more renewable energy integrated, or is permitting and some of the policy making still a challenge, and what can we do?
Happy to go. You guys don't.
Well, so as someone who, prior to the fire, was sitting on our current mayor's permitting task force, it's still a challenge. We've created a system that is not very functional. But we're trying, and we're making improvements, and I think given the circumstances, we see the need, and there is the will. We don't have the bodies, we don't have the people. We're so understaffed. We really have to look at that in a broader picture as an industry. We have people, for every 7 people leaving, we have 1 person entering our industry.
I like that you mentioned you're working on the mayor's permitting task force. We have something similar on Hawaii Island, and everyone's facing labor shortages and so forth, including our government offices. And what we found is it really helps if we just volunteer and give them information. They don't have the time to do the research, so if we're seeing that there's a void, if we offer to help, that really helps. So I would like to encourage our audience members, don't be hesitant to say, it's easy to say, oh, this is a problem, but if you have a fix to the problem or a recommended fix, I would suggest that we be more willing to share that. And as I like to say, we want to help government learn or help them so that we can teach them so that we can help ourselves in the process. So, Race, I know you've got some slides if you'd like to proceed with yours.
Sure, thanks. And, I'll take this opportunity primarily being here on Maui and working with an over 100-year-old company that's Maui-based. I've encountered a lot of questions about exactly, what our plans are. Some people, many of those in this room, may have worked for the company previously. Maui Land and Pineapple is a large company by land holdings. And I think what I wanted to share as a little bit is just as it relates to resiliency, to give you a sense of how we're thinking about the needs of the community and trying to connect the dots between the assets that we have and what those communities' needs are so we can build a more resilient future. Our vision that we've been working on since over the past year is effectively looking at stabilizing the population here. And how do we do that across housing, food security, water security, and so forth. And the way we do it, and perhaps hasn't been happening as much over the past decade, will be putting our land into productive use and taking a very proactive approach to doing so. Big picture, right? When you look at West Maui, we are one of the largest landowners on that side of the island. And we have a very kind of careful approach to how we steward our land because, for instance, at the top of our property, we have one of the largest privately owned preserves, which is a watershed. And we provide the majority from that watershed of water, of fresh, high-quality drinking water to West Maui. So it's very critical that we look at land from a resiliency standpoint not just the housing that you need, but also the water to supply those families. So the big picture, just to give you an idea of where our priorities lie and our focus on connecting the dots, we have a fairly diverse portfolio of assets, whether it's residential land, commercial buildings. We have 3 town centers that create a large number of jobs on this side of the island, and West Maui. But we're very focused also on how we take our agricultural land and our conservation land and use that to create more economic stability, food security, water security. And on the water side, the energy situation became very pronounced to us because our water system that provides a large portion of the water to West Maui, following the fires, had no power, right? And these are water systems that typically aren't designed to run on backup generators for many days at a time. And so if I had a prop that I would bring in today to talk about energy resiliency and security, it would be a diesel gas can, because that's how we kept the water flowing in West Maui for 2 weeks. It was teams of people with 4-wheel drive driving around and refilling diesel generators to keep the water flowing. Because, as Lahaina lost pressure, we provide water to the county, and we provide water to the Napili, the Honokawai areas, and most of those are running off systems that we're relying on backup power. So when I think of energy resiliency that supports housing, I'm also thinking upstream of that, beyond the home, to where the water's coming from, and ensuring that we're thinking, how do we make sure those systems can withstand the storms or long periods of outages? And it's something we're very focused on at the moment.
Ben, you looked like you were wanting to add something.
No, it's just my phone was buzzing relentlessly. I apologize.
Okay, no problem. So here's a question I have for you. The 2020 census says that 55% Native Hawaiians now live outside of Hawaii. And I'm going to venture to guess that we'd see similar numbers if we talk about Kamaina, who were born and raised here, maybe not Native Hawaiian by blood, but they consider themselves Hawaiian because they were born and raised here, and they too now live outside. As developers and designers and sustainability specialists and influencers, how is that changing the picture for development and affordable housing? Does that impact? Because if people are moving to Hawaii because being in Hawaii and the culture and everything, the traditions and so forth resonate with them, and affordability is now such an issue that we have 55% living elsewhere, how does that impact our conversation today and the long-term resiliency of housing and energy, et cetera, our population, I guess, or I shouldn't say our population, our presence and relevance?
I can speak to how we're looking at it. It's been a crisis for a while, so the fact that the data is now just showing how bad it is I think only just outlining how long the crisis has been happening. It comes back to stability, right? If people don't feel stable, they don't have a house that they can afford, a job they can, that they see a future in, right? If they're worried about where their kids are going to go to school, for all intents and purposes, they may choose not to have many children if they're worried about the cost of living or they don't have a job to support them. So even before they choose to leave, right, there are other impacts that are profound, right? And we're seeing that in the way our population is changing. And Maui is the tip of the spear for that issue in Hawaii. So our focus at a high level is exactly that. How can we create housing that's truly affordable, or land that's available for housing that can then be utilized? Right now, we're in the process of trying to provide land for temporary housing in West Maui, and we have tenants of those parcels that are going through the permitting process to make it available and in the construction process. But we've put in place a very robust process for approving or reviewing housing, as an example. And so I think it's a good thing to look at the process that we created that may have been created during a different era and looking at whether or not that process fits a crisis era where production is needed in a significant way. Because every dollar of cost that ends up landing in the cost of a home doesn't just add $1 to the price of that home, right? I mean, the bank that loaned the money needs to get paid. I mean, there's additional multiples that happen to it. So, you know, the big picture, I think for us, it's making more land available for it and thinking holistically of not just homes, but jobs and productivity. And then I think questioning and focusing on that process and how can we help it to be an enabler of a crisis response rather than, you know, operating in a similar way as it may have happened when it wasn't a crisis.
Thank you.
Well, I'd speak to that just a little bit. You know, it's such a nuanced problem, and there's almost everything. Either it's energy, it's land regulations, but you know, it's been such a long time that we've been talking about this. The first time that there was a mention in a Maui, a County of Maui document that there was an affordability crisis or issue with housing, it was 1972. So I think we're in an interesting time. As the proverb says, may you live in interesting times. With the sort of emergency that the fires have presented to us, we're having these conversations. We've developed processes over the years from a land planning standpoint. You know, on Maui, we always say we don't want it to turn into Oahu, no offense, but you know, that's the thing. We want to care for the land. We don't want it to be overdeveloped, but at the same time, we lost that balance between caring for the people that are here too, right? And when we're looking at, say, building codes and that every single dollar that we have to spend on a house is exacerbated by mortgage and interest and all that stuff. So how can we make housing as cheap as possible? And having these debates about building codes and how balancing resiliency. Can you survive a storm? Not if you're living in a tent, right? So there's so many single wall homes here on Maui and across the state that don't meet any codes, right? They're very low codes. And I'm for codes and safety, but we've lost connection to affordability. If we look at the number of pages in a code book and we put that on a graph, it would be like this. If we also on that same graph, if we put average income, it would be like that. There's a delta. And we've got to come back to some semblance of allowing people to build wealth, generational wealth, and be able to either build their own home or buy a home, and that home's not too expensive from the very beginning before someone puts, you know, pencil to paper and starts drawing it.
Thanks, Jacqui. I want to acknowledge that, you know, I grew up in Massachusetts. I moved here when I was 19. This is not home in the same sense it is for others, so please forgive me for trying to answer what is a really important question. You know, the mayor's priority on Oahu is housing, absolutely, and houselessness. And there are second and third priorities, but that is number one. And everything we can do to help with affordability, we want to do. Again, I believe it has to do with really focusing our limited resources. I think it has to do with recognizing what the federal government has put on the table with regards to the resources that are coming and being prepared for that, because I'm not sure in every aspect that we are. I think the permitting issues are critical. I will say that has been another issue for him that has been key. And I believe, although I can't see him, that my friend Rocky Mold, again, would say that there has been tremendous progress and perhaps more that is needed, but tremendous progress in Oahu's, City and County's Department of Planning and Permitting in that regard. And that relates to everybody. So that relates to the affordability of doing the things that you guys are talking about. End of the day, I think there's another thing I want to say, which is that you opened by talking about how it wasn't just Lahaina. Obviously, Lahaina was just an awful tragedy and the worst in a very long time for the whole country. But for me, reflecting on energy costs and then thinking that those tragedies are happening across the country and across the world makes me feel obligated to do more and pay more for my energy and to insist that my energy, like you do, is carbon free. And I think that is an obligation that those of us who have the resources need to take on in earnest and recognize that that's our responsibility. So I think that's an important part of it, and we can't conflate this idea that affordability and resiliency or energy costs are competing, because they're not. They're you know, there's an externality that we have long been trying to bring into the conversation that we must, and we're seeing the results of that. So really a difficult and long-term conversation we're all going to continue to wrangle with.
Yes, it is a long-term conversation, and for those of you who were here last year, we did have a discussion on permitting and the challenges that the energy sector is facing with respect to permitting and to regulations and so forth. And I think everyone here is aware of the UHERO study where it was confirmed that, in fact, Hawaii's housing affordability is impacted because we are the most regulated when it comes to developing housing and so forth. So to that point, I guess, Race, what I would like to ask you is, to that point, where do you think the renewable energy and actually our energy sector overall, developers, David, for you, the designers and so forth, and for you, Ben, the folks who are involved in trying to come up with long-term resilience and sustainability plans and so forth, where are the nexus points where all of us can work together and collaborate? I know we collaborate on projects, but is there a bigger collaboration we can have where we can have that influence on legislature and on Congress and so forth, so that we're not here next year talking about the same thing, but we'll hear next year talking about the same thing in a different way because we've kicked the can forward a little bit. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll share. I mean, for this group in this room, I think most of you would associate with this. But having been an energy builder at one point in time, I think the solar HSEA and the groups that advocated at the time, they did a great job of making it very clear that if the incentives are this much, it will get built, right? And if I think of that approach, it was so successful because it was right. I mean, it said if you incentivize this much via federal or state or whatnot, it will happen based on the cost of the systems at that time and the cost of energy that could be sold. But what was fascinating about it at a high level is, right, it addressed a crisis. A crisis being the need to convert or accelerate the production of something, right, through incentives and through expedited permitting and so forth. And when I think of one of the major crises we're talking about now, about housing, I think of what if that more simple approach was taken from an incentive level, right? If there was an incentive for affordable housing, I know there's many, many programs for it. Trust me, I've had the pleasure of working with many of the agencies that deploy resources to do that. But what I do love about energy was kind of how simple it was, right? To get the credits and the rebates that made it cost effective for people to make the decision to invest in it across the board, both large builders, the doing grid scale projects like I did, and then also the person choosing to put it on their rooftop. I think that simple and elegant approach, it was so easy to understand and execute across the spectrum of product at one time. It resulted in a huge acceleration of construction of that thing, of renewable energy. If the similar approach may be taken looking at affordable housing, I think there might be opportunities to accelerate similarly. And I know it's happening across the board with the incentivization of ADUs and things like that are looking at trying to accelerate new products that address the affordable housing crisis. But again, as it goes back to energy, I just loved how elegantly simple it was during its kind of infancy of getting going. And I know a lot of work went into it. But as a builder of it, it made it very easy to get it done.
Thank you, Race. And, with my background as an engineer, we often say if it ain't broke, why are we bothering to try and fix it? And I guess one of the questions I have is there an opportunity for all of us to start being more collaborative? Certainly there's some competition between different sectors and different technologies and so forth, but if we were to become more collaborative and recognize that, in fact, our efforts complement each other, and more important, we're all moving towards the same end game here. We're all trying to get to the same finish line. Are your thoughts on that? Where do we have the opportunity to form a bigger and better collaboration? I mean, all of us, or many of us, go to legislature, and it's always frustrating because they count pieces of paper. Oh, I got, 3,000 pieces of testimony on this, and that's the direction I'm going in. Even if 2,999 are just Me Too testimony, they only got 15 testimonies, really thoughtful and so forth. So if we could collaborate more, where do we collaborate more? What are your thoughts on this?
Sure, Jacqui. So I've worked for 3 different mayors in my time in government, and I can tell you that none of them like mandates, right? So mandates are a necessary part of government, but the intent of a mandate is to bring up kind of the last stragglers in a policy conversation. And so as government, we need to do a better job engaging and learning from industry. And I think I'm thinking in my mind right now specifically about the energy code, because I agree with you in terms of complexity. We also need to make sure that there is industry acceptance and agreement on the larger societal goals that have been set. And that if we're saying we're trying to get, for example, to zero carbon by 2045, which is the marching orders I have, then what does that mean in terms of the energy code? Because it certainly implies that we're going to need one. And should it be simpler? Yes. Should it be something that we agree on as opposed to that we argue about? Absolutely. The last time we did this, we got out a year and a half early, and we spoke to the larger developers where we could individually. And it was really refreshing that a lot of their staff architects were saying, hey, we can do these things by and large, and then there's an exception here or there where we're learning. We're learning that, hey, these are things that maybe we can't do, or these are things that maybe we don't see a lot of benefit from, and improving the code in that way. I do think that the conversation has gotten a little bit binary at times, and it's like it's either affordability or energy efficiency, and I think that's wrong, and I think we have to all kind of step up to the plate on that. But it's coming from a place of all having the same values about where we sit and what urgency there is about energy efficiency, about resilience, about community, and all those things, and then making those tough decisions, which works all the way through the system that we have.
Thank you. And it really is making the tough decisions, and everyone in this room is involved in making those hard decisions. But I really think that we have an opportunity at this conference every year to really speak very frankly with each other and have those awkward, difficult conversations that we sometimes shy away from. So kind of moving in that direction, what is an awkward, difficult thing that you would discuss with me backstage, but not necessarily in mixed company, and I'm sticking to energy and resiliency and housing here, guys. But is there something awkward and difficult that we shy away from saying because, there might be a council member in the room or a legislator or, the regulated utility? I think we have to be willing to have those awkward, difficult conversations because we're not going to get to a point of common impact if we're shying away from it. So I'm going to challenge you with that question.
Well, in the name of our company is Hawaii Off-Grid, so you may assume a certain attitude towards the regulated utility. And I mean, I think that being involved in the solar industry for so long in Hawaii, I've seen the heyday, when it was just NIM and everybody was just going, and then the rules changed and you saw a lot of things go downhill. And I think it's a similar time right now. The grid's saturated, trying to figure out if battery bonus is good for you or not, and, smart export. And I think for me, that's the biggest thing. Like I know for a fact that we have all the tools that we need to meet our goals, right? Everything but the will and collectively, and we can do it, and everything is there that we need to do it. But the processes that have been set up over the years that have never taken those things into consideration, they don't change quick enough. And as we're seeing more and more disasters, as we're seeing an increasing homeless population, as we're seeing a higher exodus out of our state, now is the time, and it seems like it's the confluence. So I'm excited to see that, but there has to be, that question.
So David, before I move on to Ben and Race, because I'd like to get their thoughts on this too, you mentioned your company off-grid and so forth, but what I did not hear in your discussion is naysaying of the regulated utilities. So I'm assuming that you recognize that there is a place for everyone in the room to play. And that's kind of the point I was getting to, is there's a tendency, I think, for some folks to demonize different sectors of our industry. And in doing so, I find that we actually become more divisive, and it makes things more difficult, because then a policymaker or a legislator or mayor feels like, oh, I have to mandate this because the kids aren't playing nicely on the playground. So I just wanted to make the point and clarify with you that you're saying there is room for everyone.
For sure, for sure. And to kind of put it together a little bit in choices or options that may not seem intuitive. So why do we have energy codes? It's to use less energy. But in the world of abundant, renewable, and cheap energy, that's not the way that I look at energy. You know, I grew up, and if you walked out of the room, you shut the light off because, Dad was going to yell at you, because that's costing money. Don't leave the door open if the air conditioner's on. That's not the way I live now. Leave all the lights on, run the air conditioners. It's all carbon neutral, So in our energy code for Maui, and we copied this from the Big Island, so thank you, Big Island, for that. It's if you're off grid, you don't have to meet the energy code. So if you want to save money on insulation and things like that. Now, I'm not saying that you should have an inefficient house, but there are ways that we can design a house without R30 insulation and without double pane windows that still performs really well in our tropical environment. And the purpose of the energy code is so we release less carbon into the atmosphere, right? So if you're off grid, then you can save money on your house.
So I think Leilani did us a service this morning in talking about the amount of work it takes to get onto the same page. And really it comes down to understanding if we're talking about the same thing. And very often we're not, right? Very often we're having different conversations about where we want to go, and the misunderstanding is way upstream of what we're talking about. I will say my awkward moment, and this is very candid, so hopefully I'll be okay with this, but my awkward moment was not when Governor mentioned his phone number, but when he said, hey, LNG is on the table. And as somebody who's been working in this space for a while, that's hard, but I think it was courageous in the sense of his saying, let's open up the conversation about what these things do, right? To me, it's really challenging because we I believe it's implicit that we must address our carbon pollution. But what he's saying is that there's an affordability question here, and the tools on the table include some of these things, and the analysis should include how we all feel together about, are we exceptionalists? Do we say that we don't need to deal with our carbon problem because we're so small? I hear that argument a lot, and I don't buy it personally, but that's a decision for community to make. Do we think about what are the other implications of those kind of commitments relative to other commitments we could make? Do we get locked into a future, or is it actually a future that is more affordable? Like, those are genuine questions that are appropriate to ask. So that's definitely the thing that I would say. I might not say on stage, but you prompted me, and I hope others will have the same conversations.
Go ahead, Race.
As you raised, an awkward question. So, again, I'm really excited about technology today as it relates to energy. Hugely excited about it, especially in the housing sphere, because of the resiliency it can provide. And so I'd probably ask you, because I would anyone, a simple question, because if our goal is to get land into active use for housing, right? Would you rather have, if you were in the market to purchase a piece of land for your family, would you rather have the infrastructure in place for connection to the electric grid and pay a certain number for that land that has all that infrastructure baked in and the money went in to build it? Or would you rather pay less for that piece of land and do it yourself? It's kind of I do it one-on-one because I want to know what you would like, because everyone's different. But that's the discussions that are happening now, and they are a bit awkward. But as with a company that's focused on getting land to use for housing, I really would like to know, and we've started that market research, and the initial results are a little fascinating because it depends. But when you get down to housing affordability, it's a real question. You know, we have the ability to make land available for homes at a lower price if it doesn't come with the infrastructure to connect to a grid, and then it starts to become a preference to the buyer of what they would choose.
Can I just speak to that real quick? Because it's a very important point, and it's the antiquated rules and regulations that we have. So our subdivision requirements right now require us to put in that infrastructure. You know, those decisions were made decades ago. And if you look at the difference between a housing development, for example, Ohana Hope Village, which again, hopefully a lot of you can come take a look at, we were comparing it to another temporary housing project that our electrical engineer is working on. There's a delta of millions of dollars between the infrastructure that they're having to put in to provide temporary power to these temporary dwellings and being completely off-grid and self-contained. Like, it's just a dollars matter. That's it. But it's, from a subdivision standpoint, it's the regulations that we have to follow. So those need to be changed.
Well, I appreciate what Ray said, and I think we are having this really candid conversation, and I think what's implicit there is that it's the individual decision kind of in the non-existence of community, right? Like, what's best for me? And I think what you offered, David, is that clearly points out that there's a break in the system, like the rules need to improve so that somebody can be on the grid. The question is, you know, we did collectively, whether we want to own it or not, make a decision to have regulated utilities for decades and decades, and they worked for us for decades and decades. And I would put forward that it's not just the utility, it's all of us that have kind of created this system that is now not functioning the way it should, perhaps. And your example, I think, really highlights that in an extreme case. But what is the value of that thing? Like, there's clearly really high value to all of us being able to have access to energy through a grid that serves everyone, through a grid that allows people to participate in one way or another. And you see all these things bubbling up, and as they get stronger, I think it demonstrates what we ultimately want to get to. So I think you guys are doing a great job of putting pressure on the system to say, how do we change it? And I know that the regulators and others are having the exact same conversation. They just use a different language, and it's not as accessible always. But it's really exciting to be here, to be seeing this, and you know, it's clearly difficult, and there's a tremendous amount of pressure because of everything that's transpired. And again, I can't even, you know, it's here we are, and what happened last summer is just unimaginable to those of us who aren't, you know, weren't part of it, and it's not even, I don't even feel it's my place. Like, I really feel awkward in talking about it relative to these other things, but we have to talk about the implications of all these pieces and how they interrelate, and what we're going to do together to solve it.
Thank you all for your candid responses. And, you know, we've been hearing a lot about how we operate at the speed of trust, and we, alongside that, simultaneously make decisions at the speed of trust. And as we're trying to build trust, should we continue to work at the speed of trust, or should we start looking at being more visionary and recognizing that a lot of the people in this room, a lot of the technologies, a lot of the policies that we're talking about and the changes that need to be made are, again, part of that vision and moving forward that we need to have. And that's also something that takes courage, I think. And I guess I'm asking if our industry, you feel, has that courage it needs, because in order for us to get to where we want to be, we're having to take a lot of looks back, and I find people get really uncomfortable looking back. They want to start right now at this moment as if this is when time started. And it seems that that's where a lot of our policies and overreaching permitting considerations and so forth come from. So I'd kind of be interested in what your thoughts are on that, because I see the Hawaii Energy Conference being a convening of people who really are helping to take us forward and not leave us where we're standing now. And so much of what we're discussing is us kind of treading in place here. Okay, sorry, audience. Silence is not, when you ask a question that brings silence.
I feel like there's a tremendous amount of really positive things going on. I think you're right that sometimes we get so far behind on things that people become unwilling to talk about whether there is movement, right? Because the frustration is there. And I think you hear that in community sometimes, because community is very attuned to obviously what's happening in their own lives, and they don't have access to the information that's of what's happening on the policy level. So the lack of awareness that people understand perhaps in some cases the problem and are trying to solve it is something, when shared, is a tremendous outlet for these challenges, right? And it brings people together. And so I think, this conference is an opportunity to do that, but we're all fairly privileged in this room. So the question is, how do we have a broader conversation? And then really, again, acknowledging that I do think that the values are pretty well aligned here. People want more affordable housing. Nobody wants people, especially Hawaiians, to have to leave Hawaii, and we know that's happening, and it's not right. People want more resilience, and we know that we have to do a lot and make major investments. I mean, I wonder what you guys think about that, but I feel like there's tremendous efforts and progress that is something actually that, yes, we need to go faster always, but I wouldn't say standing still.
Again, I go back to, I think the energy industry, especially renewable energy industry, did an amazing job of kind of saying, visionary, right? We need to save the planet, right? It was like the flag on the hill was, we need to do this, or else, everything else isn't worth it, because we'll ultimately destroy the place we love, right? And when they did that, that vision united so many different elements of government and business and community to get things done and move it in a very positive direction, and Hawaii has led the way in doing that. I think similarly, Hawaii is also at the tip of the spear of the housing crisis. And so I do really thank those that are being visionary and bold in the moves that may address that as a crisis. But similarly, I would hope that there is that visionary approach of a flag on a hill, like we need to do something, whatever that thing is, whether it's a big, Energy in Hawaii used a number. I can't remember what it was because it changed, but there was like, we need to get to this level by this date, because. I mean, similarly, something like that that's bold and visionary that everyone can align to and move towards, I love, because it's, again, simple and elegant. It gets everyone focused on the goal, and then we can rally around it, and at our level, we're doing the necessary things to support it, but at the end of the day, we know if we get there, that it'll be a much better quality of life and a better outcome for ourselves and our children.
I would just say to that this is probably the most unique and, I guess, formative time in history. Like there's a confluence of a number of things. As an entrepreneur, as a small business person, the challenges that we have ahead of us are opportunities to enrich our local business people, our local laborers, renewable energy and energy in general. What we have to do to address climate change is a massive economic opportunity to put wealth in the hands of the middle class. And it's unprecedented. And we're in the midst of a new industrial revolution with the digital and AI, and we can't see it because it's going on right now and it's changing things so fast. But what we do know is that we have to change fast with it. And to do that, we need people who can come up with new ways to do things. So that entrepreneurial spirit, which also helps combat the issues of affordability so it's, I'm optimistic, and I think that looking forward, at the same time being able to look back and see what we need to fix is really important.
Thank you. And I apologize if it seemed like I was being pessimistic, because I actually have great feelings about the people who come to this conference. All of you are such visionaries and clearly committed and passionate about the conversations that we're having here and about wanting to make change and making things more resilient. So thank you very much. We've got about 30 seconds left. And David, I've got a series of questions about the visit tomorrow. So you could go to the registration desk and sign up for them. They're at 9 a.m. and 10 a.m., as I believe, and David is going to be your host, and I understand that if you can't make tomorrow and you have another opportunity, just reach out, and David's happy to accommodate you at that time. With that, I'd like to get an applause for our very diverse but well-spoken panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you all very much.